It began with a whisper, a single recording that tore through the Philippine political establishment like a typhoon through Manila Bay. Within hours, that whisper became a roar, shaking the foundations of government, polarizing millions, and sending shockwaves across Asia. Late one humid evening, an audio clip surfaced online. A high-ranking government official, one of the most powerful in the country, was allegedly heard negotiating favors with a foreign conglomerate tied to major infrastructure contracts. It spread like wildfire across social media. Within 24 hours, hashtags were trending, protests began forming, and the president's inner circle was thrust into chaos. At first, government spokesmen called it fake news. But then, rival factions within Congress began to circulate authenticated versions of the same clip, each claiming to possess the real truth. Suddenly, every Filipino, from Manila's bustling Makati business district to the fishing villages of Palawan, had an opinion. The political temperature spiked overnight. The Philippines has long been a nation of political dynasties, where names, not parties, dominate the ballot. Families like empires rise and fall, but their networks often endure. This feud, however, was different. It wasn't just about power, it was about control of the nation's direction in a changing Asia. Over the past decade, the Philippines positioned itself as a pivotal player in the Indo-Pacific theater, a U.S. treaty ally, a strategic maritime power in the South China Sea, and a rapidly growing economy in Southeast Asia. But with great opportunity came greater tension. Competing loyalties to old political families, to foreign powers, and to new economic interests were colliding behind the scenes. The leaked tape didn't just expose corruption. It cracked open decades of buried rivalries and exposed a brewing war between two political blocs, one favoring closer ties with Western allies, and another leaning toward the rising influence of Beijing. Within days, Manila's streets filled with protesters waving banners that read, "Walang forever sa corrupción." There's no forever in corruption. University students joined labor unions, and even some business leaders began speaking out. The people were no longer content with silence. For many Filipinos, the scandals symbolized a deeper frustration, a sense that no matter who ruled, corruption and foreign manipulation remained constant. It was not merely about one leader's alleged misconduct. It was about the soul of the nation. And yet, as anger built in the streets, another movement, smaller but growing, rose in defense of the accused, claiming that the leak was part of a foreign disinformation campaign meant to destabilize the government. The narrative war had begun. Inside Malacanang Palace, advisors and generals debated through the night. Intelligence reports warned of coordinated protests, possibly backed by rival politicians. Rumors spread that elements within the military were uneasy. Some cabinet members began distancing themselves publicly. Foreign embassies issued quiet warnings to their citizens. To the outside world, this looked like just another Philippine political scandal. But seasoned diplomats in Tokyo, Washington, and Beijing saw something far more dangerous: the potential collapse of one of Asia's most strategically positioned democracies. The Philippines sits at the crossroads of some of the world's busiest sea lanes. Its military alliances, trade relationships, and strategic geography make it a critical player in Asia's balance of power. If instability in Manila escalates, it could ripple outward, affecting shipping routes, investment flows, and even the fragile peace in the South China Sea. Regional analysts began asking urgent questions. Would a weakened Philippine government still enforce its maritime claims? Could external powers exploit the chaos to strengthen their foothold? And perhaps most importantly, if democracy falters here, what message does that send across Asia? Within weeks, resignations began. Cabinet ministers were sacked, while others publicly defected to rival camps. Social media became a battlefield of propaganda, fake news, and emotional appeals. The opposition seized the moment, calling for an investigation that could potentially unseat the president. The feud had outgrown politics. It was now a national reckoning, a struggle for truth, loyalty, and identity in a nation still searching for unity. Every crisis begins with a spark. In the Philippines, that spark had become a wildfire. And as the smoke rose over the capital, neighboring nations began to realize this wasn't just a domestic dispute. It was the beginning of a geopolitical storm that could reshape Asia's future. In every political storm, there are two wars being fought, the one you see on the news, and the one waged quietly in boardrooms, embassies, and smoke-filled backrooms. This is the story of the players behind the feud and the invisible forces guiding their every move. The sitting president of the Philippines had once been hailed as a reformer, charismatic, populist, and unafraid to challenge the nation's elite. His rise to power was built on promises of transparency, infrastructure development, and national pride. For years, his approval ratings were unmatched. But power in the Philippines is fragile, especially when it threatens entrenched interests. The leaked audio scandal struck not only his credibility, but his political alliances. Those who once cheered him now whispered about his downfall. Cabinet members defected, old rivals resurfaced, and the once loyal business community began to hedge their bets. Yet the president remained defiant. "They can smear my name," he declared in a nationally televised address, "but they cannot silence my mandate." Behind that conviction, however, his advisors knew the truth. His enemies were no longer confined to the opposition. They were inside his own camp. On the other side stood a political titan's heir, the scion of a powerful dynasty that had dominated Philippine politics for decades. Educated abroad, fluent in the language of both Wall Street and Washington, he presented himself as the stabilizer, the man who could restore order amid chaos. His speeches painted a picture of discipline and global confidence. "The Philippines," he said, "must stop being a pawn in other nations' games." Yet behind his rhetoric stood a vast network of oligarchs, business tycoons, and retired generals, many of whom had lost influence under the current administration. For them, his victory wasn't just political, it was personal. It was a return of power, profit, and prestige. In the Philippines, politics and business are inseparable. Behind every speech is a sponsor. Behind every reform, an investor. As the feud deepened, corporate alliances fractured. Media conglomerates chose sides. One television giant aired exposés against the administration, while another defended it with nightly fact checks. Advertising budgets became political weapons. Billionaire families, controlling everything from energy to real estate, began quietly funding rival movements under the guise of public advocacy. But not all the money was domestic. Intelligence reports hinted at foreign contributions, funds moving through offshore accounts, disguised as development aid or corporate investments. The Philippines had become a chessboard, and the players weren't all Filipino. In Beijing, policymakers saw opportunity. The feud, they reasoned, could weaken a pro-Western government and open doors for deeper economic dependence. Infrastructure projects under the Belt and Road Initiative suddenly came under review, not for performance, but for political loyalty. In Washington, meanwhile, think tanks and diplomats watched nervously. The Philippines was not just another ally. It was the linchpin of the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. A political collapse in Manila could unravel years of military cooperation, from bases in Luzon to joint patrols in the South China Sea. Both powers understood one truth. Whoever won the Philippine feud could tilt Asia's balance for the next decade. While politicians shouted and businessmen schemed, the Philippine military remained publicly neutral but privately divided. Some generals were loyal to the president, grateful for budget increases and modernization programs. Others, nostalgic for the discipline of past regimes, sympathized with the opposition's promise of stability. Intelligence insiders whispered of meetings between officers and political envoys, pledging support in exchange for key defense posts. The fear wasn't of a coup, not yet, but of a split chain of command. And in a country where the military has historically decided the fate of presidencies, that was enough to terrify the region. In the heart of Manila, life moves on. Jeepneys rattle down crowded streets. Children play basketball in the alleys. church bells ring across the skyline. The same sun that once set over a divided nation now rises over one that still believes, still hopes, that unity is possible. The Philippines may have stumbled, but it did not fall. Its story, like its people, is one of resilience. And in that resilience lies Asia's greatest lesson. That no matter how wild the feud, how deep the corruption, or how loud the chaos, the will of a people determined to rise will always outlast the storm. Nations do not die from defeat, a Filipino historian once wrote. They die when their people stop believing. The Philippines still believes. And as Asia watches, it learns that democracy's survival doesn't depend on its perfection, but on its persistence. In the end, this was never just a story about a political feud. It was a story about the future of Asia and the enduring power of a people who refuse to surrender their hope. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel